Okay, hi everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Nick Mussallem. I'm the head of product. I think our mics are too close. So unfortunately, Tyrone wasn't able to join us today. His wife became ill, so he stayed back. So instead, I'm gonna moderate this panel, and then Lucian, who's on the product team at Ava Labs, is going to join us. I've got Chen Fang here with me.
Quick intro?
Yeah, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, I'm Chen. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Bitco. We are a OG, pretty original infrastructure company in the crypto space, been around for quite some time. We do three things for three major segments. We have this amazing wallet platform that allows for programmers to come in and activate any number of wallets, program it however they see fit. We have a qualified custodial service for institutional investors, and we have a prime service offering on top of that. In terms of segments, again, like it's great for enterprises, engineers looking to build on a number of different blockchains, including Avalanche. From a custody perspective, and there's a bunch of investment vehicles, funds that need a place to secure their assets. They basically turn to our custody solution. And in terms of the third segment, we work with a number of select government agencies from around the world and governments from around the world, including El Salvador, the Chivo application they have over there. Underneath all that fun stuff, there's a little bit of Bitco magic making it all work. So that's Bitco in a nutshell.
Awesome, thank you. Serafin, do you want to, Serafin's here from Stake Wallet. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Serafin. I'm the CEO of Stake Wallet. So we're building a multi-chain mobile wallet. We are across more than 20 protocols that we also support through native staking, so you can natively stake right in the app. Yeah, with a pretty powerful wallet. We're the only wallet that supports Wallet Connect V1 and V2. We offer yield vaults and various other yield opportunities right in the app as well. Multi-chain NFT support. Yeah, so we're really looking to build a next generation wallet.
We're psyched to have you here. Thanks for joining us. And then Lucian, do you want to give a quick intro on yourself?
Sure. My name is Lucian Stroie. I work with Nick on the product team, and yeah, I get to touch on various strategies involving subnets, institutional DeFi, and government, as well as having worked a bit on the NFT strategy that we're excited to share more about soon. Thanks.
Okay, great. So bear with me because Tyrone had a lot of really nice questions put together, and I'm just going to kind of go off the sheet that he had. So each of you here represent a slightly different part of the stack and a different target audience. So, Lucian, we're at the protocol layer, focused on developers and users. Chen, you're at the infrastructure and services layers, focused on institutions and government. And Serafin, you're at the app layer, focused on retail users. I'm interested to get all your perspectives on what you think about building Web3 products for your specific audience set. So Serafin, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. I mean, the sort of like paradigm that we're really trying to build around is minimizing user complexity for the user while maximizing agency, right? Which is objectively kind of like at different ends of the same spectrum, right? So I mean, put differently, we're trying to give you maximum feature richness and capabilities while making it as easy as possible to actually act on those. And so that basically means that we're trying to disambiguate that one dimension into two, right? Be feature rich on the one hand, but also be very, very easy to use. And so there's actually quite a lot of work that goes into doing that. So our tech team does a lot of work on the different SDKs that we support in order to give you a kind of like a very homogeneous flow across all these different protocols for the same functionality, right? So we have the same staking flow for all the 20 plus protocols that we support. We have the same yield vault deposit flow for all of the yield vaults that we support, no matter whether it's on Ethereum, Phantom, Polygon, or on any other chain. So yeah, that's it sounds simple at the surface, but that's really the sort of like crux of it all. And quite frankly, I think that's also why the market for wallets, and I'm sure you can also attest to that, has not seen a real sort of like champion yet that users are really excited about. It's a little bit of a dire situation that users abide by because there's no other alternative, but they're coming to market now, and again, I think it really sort of like centers around disambiguating those two dimensions for feature richness and ease of use.
Totally, and like the fragmentation of design in Web3 is one thing we really need to overcome in these kind of intuitive, consistent experiences, right, that we're seeing in Stake Wallet. are critical to kind of the next level of adoption.
Yeah, totally. I think that, similarly how people, when they send an email, they're not necessarily familiar with SMTP and MTA, and they don't necessarily need to be, right? And I think that we're kind of trying to move into a similar paradigm with Web3, where everything's open source and you can attest that it is decentralized, but that it's ultimately, that it's routed via any chain or subnet that offers you the best performance and best price at any point in time, and that it really boils down to abstracting away the core functionalities that the user actually wants to engage on, right? Moving from A to B. You don't necessarily have to see what is happening under the hood for each transaction, or get into approving each individual transactions. You could if you wanted to, but you don't have to, right? And that sort of like optionality is, I think, what we're really trying to focus on building out.
Awesome. Chen Fang?
So DeFi, Web3, look, it's basically single player right now, and it's single sig, if you think about it, right? Where I come from on the institutional side, institutions do not have one person holding on to basically all the keys, right? One person to approve everything. That's not how these institutions work. That's not how these investment vehicles operate. They have multiple people, typically an approver of some kind, a requester, multiple viewers. So for these types of people to come into Web3 and actually use Web3 appropriately, in the current setup, simply, there's a pretty big gap there. So UX, obviously, there's gaps. From a security perspective, there's also gaps, right? Going back to this whole single sig concept, when you have a couple $1,000s worth of coins, maybe tens of thousands, even hundreds of $1,000s worth of assets on a hardware device, pick your favorite hardware device, Ledger, Trezor, that you interface with potentially one of these wallets, it's okay because it's only $10,000. But when we're working with a fund that's 300 million assets under management, that's a different story. Like, how do you get those types of people accessing the dApps that exist out there on these various chains? It's a different world. So from a security perspective, there needs to be more work done on that front. And finally, from a data perspective, it's also very interesting, right? Like, for the average person clicking through these experiences, great. If something works, awesome. Something doesn't work, you try again. And when April 15th comes along, at least in the United States, and you have to file taxes, and you're stumbling through the TurboTax flows, scratching your head about how much taxes do I actually owe, as an individual user, you'll probably stumble through it. But as an institution, from a raw data perspective, there's a huge gap, right? They have fund administrators, accountants, auditors scouring through all these trades on a daily or weekly basis. If we don't get the data narrative right, from a wallet's perspective, from a blockchain perspective, it's hard for these individuals to come in with their army of auditors to allow for these types of transactions. So these are just three areas that I see gaps between where Web3 currently is and where institutions are.
It's a totally different problem set. Thanks for that. Lucian, you want to talk about the protocol layer?
Sure. Yeah, oftentimes we don't really consider devs themselves as users, but in a very clear and obvious opinion, developers are probably the most important clients. Well, client, it's not directly a client relationship, but you know what I mean. For a layer one blockchain, devs are the lifeblood. Like, you win or die based on who decides to build what on your chain. And there is a process by which you got to get people comfortable with the technology that you build. So you end up having to follow people along the same product lifecycle that you do. It's just that you're helping people build off of the tooling that you provide. And oftentimes there are gaps in Web3. We've all kind of just gotten accustomed to it. Just be like, okay, the docs haven't been revised, or there's other gaps with regards to, for example, if you're setting up a subnet and you have a secure key that adds validators to your subnet, we noticed that people are pretty freaked out by using a terminal command and having a text-based private key. So by seeing people's reactions, we added ledger support specifically so that you could use a ledger to add a validator. And it seems like one of these obvious things, but it's only obvious when you step through the process with your users and kind of empathize with them as well. So as we roll out a lot of this brand new cutting edge tech, We also just need a lot of feedback with regards to how people are interacting with the tools that we offer and using it in very surprising and innovative ways that we then can introduce to the wider ecosystem as well. So yeah, that's how we do it at the protocol level.
Agree. There's this gap between the technology and where the user interfaces with it that still has a lot of work to be done. And I think we're making strides on it, right? But it's one of those areas that's still painfully obvious to us that we have to do better if we're going to achieve mass adoption. Okay, so what are some of the things about Web3 product design that are not obvious from the outside, but only become obvious as the challenge and considerations when you're actually building a Web3 product? And as a follow-on to that, what is the number one difference between building products in Web 2 versus Web3? Serafin, you want to kick us off?
Sure. I think the main difference lies in how developed the infrastructure is that underpins everything, right? I think that when you, for instance, interface with a wallet, some of the most basic functionality that you would expect from a wallet, such as seeing your transaction history or seeing when you, for instance, got, when you claimed, yield from any certain like vault or, a protocol from staking, that is a kind of like very basic interaction that you think would be, totally accessible, easily accessible via like solid APIs for virtually every major protocol, right? I mean, they all have multi-billion-dollar market caps, at least for the 20 plus that we support, and but it's pretty shocking to see that that is not a given at all, right? And the reason why most people outside of obviously like so the adoption of Solidity, the reason why people still kind of deploy on Ethereum first is because that is, at least for now, the most advanced infrastructure across any other protocol. And yeah, so I think once you really get into it, seeing how little even basic support from the protocol layer you get to work with, it's pretty shocking. So it's, again, even the very basic sort of like behaviors are pretty tough to manage on a couple of these pretty prominent L1s.
Agreed. That move from 0 to 1 and the utilities around to support the underlying builder and getting a product to market, a gap is pretty large right now.
Building Web 2 versus Web 3. So to quote everyone's favorite person in the world, Mark Zuckerberg, he's famous for saying, we've got to move fast and break things, right? This is early days Facebook, early days Silicon Valley, a long time back. Unfortunately for us, we can't really move fast and break things. As you know, the smart contracts that are deployed on these various chains, once you deploy the smart contract, that's basically it. And especially if you add a institutional lens on top, for people like us, it needs to be even more accurate. I feel like right now in the dApp ecosystem, there is a certain level of forgiveness that exists. Everyone's trying their best. Everyone's moving as fast as they possibly can. And every so often, some weird thing happens, a bug that exists that gets exploited, some funds potentially get lost here and there. And in general, assuming the team is authentic and they're trying to do the right thing, they're open about communication, the community forgives the team and you move forward, right? But again, if you add that institutional lens on top of this current situation, it makes our job at Bitco a little bit more challenging because there's really no forgiveness in the institutional space. I'm not sure how many of you talked to some Wall Street veterans in your careers, but those types of people, they demand perfection. And when it comes to software design, it's an iterative process. It's a living organism. It's hard to be perfect, right? But to cater to that industry, to cater to that sector, this really is challenging because of that, right? We cannot necessarily move fast and break things.
Totally. And I think that you have a totally different challenge in that there's already some barriers for them to participate because the stakes are so high, right? And so as you're solving for those, that really brings the comfort level in. Lucian?
Sure. So on the dev side, the story seems pretty clear. Like, we have wallets because users aren't ready to interact with crypto keys directly, right? And then we have Bitco because institutions aren't ready to deal with crypto keys themselves, right? But we expect devs to. right? It's actually part of blockchain's design. That's how we keep things permissionless. Developers need to interact directly with the cryptographic protocols because that's the root security. The problem is oftentimes devs either like to hedge or basically as a backstop in case there is a vulnerability, they keep a lot of control over the underlying protocol. And whenever you dig into a Web3 blockchain protocol, very often there's like an emergency escape incorporated in there by developers because it's new, experimental. If something goes wrong, you want to be able to fix it. But it's still not very comforting to manage hundreds of millions of dollars with private keys, right? Like your personal security changes, your entire perspective and trust of everyone you meet changes, especially when you know you have a 256-bit private key stored somewhere that essentially can demolish your entire life's work. So the end result is like, we still don't have a lot of forgiveness for developers, and we're forcing them to like interact with cryptography in order to maintain the decentralization and control over their systems. But I think we're going to realize that we need more and more kind of like levels of abstraction to help developers in order not to be put in such a stressful, high-risk situation. It seems like as an industry, we do put a lot of pressure on them specifically not to be perfect, right? Most people aren't. But at the same time, it's not going to change. It's probably one of the biggest advantages we have as a blockchain protocol. Like, there's no backup. There's no kind of like recovering from certain types of failures within the system. That doesn't mean that we can't build with them in mind and at least have some kind of like industry-wide sense of general security practices as we evolve. And usually that just involves increasing the accessibility of the tooling within our ecosystem to make doing difficult things easier so you're less likely to make a mistake.
The transaction finality and the fact that you can't roll things back, increase the stakes dramatically. Okay, let's break into some individual questions. So let's talk about gaining users' trust. Chen, I feel like there is inherent trade-offs between providing max flexibility, aka being very unopinioned, and providing a more controlled, defined experience. For example, what chains and tokens are supported, which platforms you're staking on, et cetera. How important is it to be opinionated about what you enable a user to do when building crypto products, and what is the Bitco approach?
Yeah, so look, we are known for security. At the very core of Bitco, a long time back, we were a security company first, along with obviously the software components as well. And all of our clients expect the top grade security solutions from us across the board. So to put on my Steve Jobs turtleneck, right? He oftentimes forced experiences on for users. He knew what the users wanted, right? Instead of asking users what they want. From our perspective, it's important to be very opinionated in terms of some of these things because, again, we are so security-centric, security mindset. Evaluating what to include inside of our platform, it's a very extensive process that we go through. Every single blockchain, including Avalanche, that we've added, we checked a lot of checkboxes. Our compliance team checked a lot of checkboxes for these top chains to be included within our solution. And ultimately, right, like we've been in business for a long time, since 2013, right? That's a pretty long time. We survived a number of crypto winters. And we're able to do this because of the track record that we have in terms of picking what we think is the best of the best for our customer base.
And we struggle with the same problem at the protocol layer, which is, we kind of call it the seatbelt rule or the helmet law, right? Which is how much flexibility we want to give. I mean, there's protecting the user against external attacks, but there's also protecting the user from losing their own keys and having things disappear forever.
Right, absolutely. It's super important, at least for us.
Great. So Serafin, this one's to you. So there are untold number of wallets out there, many of them offering the same or similar functionality. How have you thought about differentiating Stake Wallet from the rest, and what are some of the principles you've kept in mind when building your product?
Sure. So most wallets, when you take a look at the wallet ecosystem and kind of how wallets emerged from like the early Bitcoin clients to like the first iteration of like the Mist wallet and stuff like that, basically most of those wallets were thin wallets, right? So their focal points were key management, asset custodying, and signing transactions, and that's pretty much it. And we kind of have stayed in that realm, even the sort of like more modern wallets right now, like Rainbow or not to name too many competitors' names, but most of them still kind of like are in the same realm, right? Where we're really sort of like finding the right yield opportunities and exploring Web3 is a very sort of personal endeavor, and wallets are not here to help. So what we really are trying to do is build the opposite of that. We're trying to build a fat wallet, right? Where we are bringing the world of Web3 to you and make it all accessible through the wallet itself, right? And the reason why we're doing that is because the sort of like underlying hypothesis, I guess, from our side is, and I know that this is also being touched on by a lot of other people, so it's not necessarily anything, so it's not an out there theory, right? But basically, most of the complexity will be abstracted away, right? Across like which you see this with Matcha, for instance, for swaps or 1inch, etc. It doesn't really matter which AMM you go through as long as you get the best rate, right? And as long as it's secure and reasonably fast, right? And cheap. So that basically is going to be applied also to blockchains at large. It doesn't really matter which chain your transaction is going to be executed on, as long as it gets executed with a decent amount of finality, at reasonable cost, and that it's reasonably secure, right? Which again can be audited by literally anybody. And so what we're trying to do is harness the power of abstracting away complexity again without compromising user agency, and bringing Web3 right to your right to you in the wallet. And so the way that we do that right now is we have support not just for crypto assets, but also for NFTs, and we have native support for staking. We have native support for liquid staking. We are, again, we have strategy vaults that you can deposit into, and ultimately, we also highlight a lot of different dApps across the different chains that we support, so that you as a user can immediately see, okay, what is the bridge that I should be using if I want to bridge to Avalanche, for instance, right? What are the different sort of like interesting games on Avalanche? What are NFTs that I should be checking out? What are interesting mints, right? So we're trying to help the user drink from the DeFi fire hose. While, by the way, we're not a custodial wallet, right? We are a self-custodial wallet. So we're giving the user the key, and we're trying to give you as much of a Web2-like experience while still sort of like really being Web3 at core. For which, for me personally, at least, that's the one sort of like critical behavior that we can never abstract away. If you abstract away key management and key ownership, it's no longer Web3. It's a gateway to Web3. And I totally understand that institutional world, there are totally different parameters you need to take into consideration where that might not be a possibility just yet. But for us, for the personal users, giving you your own keys and making Web3 easy for you, that's really what it needs to be about. So that's what we're building with the idea of the sort of like fat wallet. It should be your browser to Web3, your app store, your Amazon, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be a platform. And yeah, that's what we're building around.
It's very cool. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing that trend where, especially in decentralized finance, where every single site you go to that might be doing the same thing, right? It might be a different form of an AMM, but they have different names for things and they have different experiences. So you go to one site, you do the same thing on a different site. It's a completely different experience, and the user has to constantly relearn what they're doing. And that process is very painful. So what we're starting to see, like in Stake Wallet, is that you're abstracting all of what those sites are doing, and then you're just aggregating and sending, right? Your smart order routing, right? Or you're cutting order aggregation down in a way that where the user is benefiting from it, and they're not having to relearn the experience.
Yeah, totally. And ultimately, that's also how things should work, right? Because if you have to constantly relearn even the most basic steps, that causes so much friction that most people that enter Web3 will just say, no thanks, and leave, right? Because it's a pain in the butt. And then also that bears a lot of risk. Because if you do anything wrong in that value chain and you own your own keys and you sign your own transactions, at that point in time, that's exactly where the sort of like where the fault lines are, where exploits are possible. So by us bringing that, basically creating a lot of like middleware in between that, we're open sourcing, getting audited, etc. We can take away some of that risk so that you as a user don't constantly need to bear the brunt of this risk, like this sword of Damocles, like hanging over your head.
Totally. Okay. We're actually over. So I think that's going to cover it. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to be here today and participate with us. Thank everybody else for attending.